The song stopped the moment Wesley Hayes pushed open the longhouse door. He stood there in the threshold with an armful of cured wolf pelts and mud still drying on his boots, staring at the scene inside as the cold highland air curled past him. His daughter, Myra, 16 years old, gap-toothed, and completely incapable of staying where he left her, was kneeling on the woven reed mat near the fire pit. And crouched beside her, one large green hand moving in slow, deliberate rhythm as she guided Myra's palm in the percussive clap pattern of the verse, was Rasha Gorehorn. Rasha's amber eyes cut to Wesley the instant the door moved. Something flashed across her face: surprise, the barest edge of guilt, the involuntary stiffening of a warrior caught in an unguarded moment. Then she straightened her spine, all 6 feet of her, and the guilt dissolved into something else entirely. Her jaw lifted. Her tusks caught the firelight. She looked him dead in the eye and did not apologize, did not explain, did not flinch. She looked caught, and then she looked proud. Myra twisted around and beamed at him as though she had done nothing unusual at all. "Papa, listen. Rasha taught me the first verse of the Gorehorn battle call. I almost have the timing right." Wesley shut the door behind him. He set the pelts down on the bench beside the entrance, more slowly than was necessary, buying himself a moment to determine what exactly he was feeling. The fire crackled. Rasha had not moved. She was watching him with those gold-lit eyes, her expression unreadable now but her posture still carrying that unbending pride, as though she were daring him to object. He looked at his daughter's glowing face. He looked at the way Rasha's huge, careful hand had been guiding Myra's small one. He looked at Rasha herself, at the set of her shoulders, and the composed defiance in her gaze, and the faintest tension around her mouth that betrayed she was, in fact, waiting for his verdict. He pulled off his coat and hung it on the peg. "All right," he said. "Let's hear it then." Myra shrieked with delight. Rasha blinked. It was the first time Wesley had seen her genuinely surprised by something he said. That moment, that precise, small crack in Rasha Gorehorn's armor was, he would later understand, the beginning of everything. Wesley Hayes had come to the highland clanhold of Vorenhall 6 weeks before the winter storms locked the mountain passes. And he had done it because the Trade Council of Ashfin had offered him more money than he would see in 3 trapping seasons to do something that was either very brave or very stupid. The 2 orc clans of the Gorak, Ridge the Gorehorn Sept, and the Skullbridge Sept had agreed to a truce with the lowland human settlements after a generation of raiding and retaliation. Both sides had bled enough, but truces required witnesses, and the Trade Council needed someone who could move through both worlds without being immediately killed. Wesley was not a diplomat. He was a trapper. He knew 40 miles of mountain wilderness the way he knew the calluses on his own hands. He had traded with orc bands before, quietly, without ceremony, the way men who depend on a territory learn to coexist with everyone in it. He was not afraid of orcs. He was not sentimental about them either. He simply treated them the way he treated bears and weather, with honesty and appropriate respect. He had also, through no great planning of his own, acquired a daughter 14 months ago. Myra was not his blood. She was the orphan child of his former trapping partner, Donal Finch, who had died of a fever the previous winter. Myra was 16, sharp as a skinning knife, and had nowhere else to go. Wesley had no particular talent for fatherhood and had told her so plainly. Myra had said that was fine. She had no particular talent for being a daughter, and they had worked it out from there. She had insisted on coming to Vorenhall because she had never seen the Highlands and she was not staying behind in Ashfin while something interesting was happening. Wesley had not had the energy, or, if he was honest, the real will to stop her. Vorenhall was built on a stone shelf above a deep fjord, its longhouses arranged in a rough crescent with the great hall at the center. The walls were timber and turf, the roofs sod over whalebone and fir poles, and the whole place smelled of wood smoke and salted fish, and the particular sharpness of tanned leather in quantity. It was impressive in the blunt, functional way of things built to outlast brutal winters. There were banners on the longhouse gables clan colors, deep green and ash gray for the Gorehorn sept who controlled this hold. Wesley and Myra had been given quarters in the guest longhouse, which was warmer than it looked and positioned, he suspected deliberately, where a guard could watch the entrance without being seen. He did not mind. He would have done the same. He had not expected the truce negotiation to be complicated by a marriage arrangement. He found out about it on the third day, when Elder Brannock, a leather-faced human alderman from Ashfin who'd arrived a week before, Wesley told him over a bowl of something heavily smoked and probably delicious if Wesley had been less preoccupied. Brannock said it quietly, in the way men say things they know will cause difficulty. The Gorehorn sept has conditions, he said. They want a human man to take a Gorehorn bride, a binding through blood, not just ink and wax. Something that stakes both sides equally. Wesley had stared at his bowl. That's a hell of a condition. They've named a woman, Brannock continued. Their war speaker's daughter, Rasha Gorehorn. She's 31, experienced, well-regarded. They say she volunteered. Wesley looked up. Why? Brannock's expression had suggested he did not know and had not pressed. The council thinks it's the best path to a lasting agreement. They need someone who will actually stay. Live here, build a real connection, not a proxy or a representative, a man. He had paused. Your name was proposed because of your history with the Ridge. You're known here, you're not hated. High praise, Wesley said. Will you consider it? Wesley had not answered immediately. He was 34, not old but not young. He had a daughter who was not his daughter, a good dog who died the spring before, and a trapping line that generated enough coin to live on and not much else. He had not thought about marriage in years. He had been married once briefly, when he was 22, and it had ended in grief when his wife was taken by fever, the same way too many things ended in this hard country. He had not closed himself off from the world. He had simply been moving through it, one season at a time, and the warmth of a life shared with someone was a thing he had quietly stopped expecting. He had thought about it for 3 days, and then he had said yes. He had not met Rasha yet when he agreed. He still thought that was worth noting. He met her the next morning, outside the Great Hall, and immediately understood several things that Brannock had not mentioned. She was not merely well-regarded. She was magnetic in the way that only people who do not try to be magnetic ever are. She was tall, broad-shouldered, built with the dense, precise musculature of someone who has trained since childhood with weapons and maintained that training ever since. Her skin was a deep hunter's green, her hair black and thick, and braided back from her face in a style that used thin strips of copper-threaded leather. She had a warrior's tusks, long enough to be unmistakable but not so large as to distort her features, which were strong-boned and striking. Her amber eyes were direct to the point of being unsettling, not hostile, simply absolute, the gaze of someone who decided long ago not to waste energy on performance. She was wearing fitted warrior's leathers, a dark brown vest that laced tight across her torso over a deep green linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, high-waisted leather trousers with brass buckle straps at the thighs, and tall boots that came to the knee. Everything was functional, everything was form-fitting, and the effect was quietly formidable. She had looked him over the way he might assess a mountain route, practical, unhurried, thorough. Then she had said in clean but accented lowland common, "You are the trapper." "Wesley Hayes," he said. "I know your name," she said, not unkindly, factually. "Then you have the advantage," he said. "I usually do," she said, and she walked past him into the hall. He had stood there a moment in the cold morning air watching her go and thought, well, all right then. The truce proceedings were supposed to take 3 weeks. They began taking longer almost immediately, not through hostility, but through the specific, grinding difficulty of translating 2 generations of grievance into language that both sides could sign without feeling they had surrendered. Wesley attended the formal sessions each morning in the Great Hall, sitting at the long table with Brannock and the Gorehorn elders and the 2 Skullbridge representatives who had come from the Eastern Ridge. He was not a negotiator. His role was, as Brannock put it, connective tissue. He was there to be seen, to demonstrate that a human man was genuinely present and committed to the arrangement, to smooth the moments when the conversation snagged on old wounds. He was also there, he gradually realized, because Rasha Gorehorn was watching him, not constantly, not obviously, but in the way of someone who had been tasked with making a judgment and was taking it seriously. She sat across the hall at the Orcish side of the table, sometimes participating in the discussion through the elder's translator, sometimes listening with that absolute stillness that made him acutely aware of every time he shifted in his chair. She caught him looking at her once in the second week and did not look away. She simply held his gaze until he looked away first, and then he heard, distantly, the faintest exhalation of amusement from her side of the table. He began to look away more slowly after that. Outside the formal sessions, the hold was alive in ways he found himself drawn into despite every intention to remain professionally separate. The Gorehorn Sept were not the savage raiders of lowland stories. They were clansfolk. They had smiths and healers and weavers and hunters. They had an elder who brewed a highland spirit that was genuinely the finest thing Wesley had ever tasted. They had arguments about fish-drying techniques and complaints about the weather. They watched him with wariness at first, the kind of wariness earned by a history he had not personally made but was nonetheless the inheritor of. He did not push against it. He showed up. He did his part. He helped when hands were needed without making a production of it, and he kept his word in small things first, which was the only way worth keeping it. Myra made herself at home with the thoroughness of someone who sees no reason not to. She learned the names of every person in the hold inside a week. She traded her carved horn buttons for a lesson in Orcish nettle weaving from one of the hold's older women. She sat in on the sparring sessions in the yard with an expression of barely contained longing until the weapons trainer, a broad orc woman named Dovrak, handed her a practice staff and told her to at least stop looking pitiful about it. Myra nearly broke her wrist in the first 10 minutes and came back the next day with her arm wrapped and her chin up. It was Myra who first properly met Rasha, actually. Wesley came back from an afternoon of walking the fjord path with Elder Brannock and found Myra crouched in the stable yard, feeding dried apple rings to a Gorehorn horse, and Rasha leaning against the fence post 3 feet away watching her do it with an expression that, had Wesley known Rasha better at that point, he would have recognized as quietly charmed. Myra had looked up and said, "Did you know she speaks 5 languages? 5. I barely manage 2. "She's right here," Wesley said. "I know. I told her that too." Myra patted the horse's nose. "Her horse is nicer than people say orc war horses are." "Your daughter has no fear," Rasha told Wesley. She was addressing him, but her eyes had gone back to Myra with that same quiet interest. "She's not my—" He stopped. He had said that sentence or the beginning of it a number of times in the past 14 months. He was less sure each time that it meant what it used to mean. "She's complicated," he finished. Rasha's mouth had curved very slightly. "So is mine," she said, and walked back toward the hall. He had stood there again, watching her go, and felt something in the vicinity of his sternum do a thing he had not been expecting. The first real trouble started in the 3rd week. One of the Skullbridge representatives, a heavy-set orc named Grorak who had, in Wesley's assessment, spent the entire negotiation looking for reasons to leave, arrived at the morning session with a furious expression and a piece of parchment that he threw onto the table with the kind of force that meant he wanted everyone in the room to feel it. The parchment was a list. It took the translator a moment to convey the full weight of what it contained, but the short version was this. Someone had been passing information about the truce terms to a third party, a lowland merchant consortium that had significant interest in the mountain trade routes remaining ungoverned and violent. The list named dates and details that should have been sealed in the negotiating chamber. The room went cold in the way rooms do when people start calculating who among them they cannot trust. Wesley looked at Brannock. Brannock's face was carefully still, which told him nothing. He looked at the Gorehorn elders who were looking at the Skullbridge contingent with expressions ranging from anger to calculation. He looked at Rasha. Rasha was looking at him, not with accusation, with assessment, with a kind of direct, deliberate focus that said she was taking in everything in the room at once and he happened to be part of everything. He held her gaze and made sure his own was open. He had nothing to hide. If there was a spy in this room, it was not him. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned to the elder at her shoulder and said something quiet in Orcish. The session broke up in controlled tension. Wesley found a moment outside in the cold yard and thought it through. The information on Grorek's list had to have come from someone present in the sealed sessions. That was a short list: himself, Brannock, 3 Gorehorn clan members, the 2 Skullbridge representatives, the translator, an older human woman named Sira who had worked the highland routes for 20 years. He was not the spy. He was reasonably confident Rasha, and the Gorehorn elders were not the leak either, since the consortium's interest served humans over orcs. That left the Skullbridge contingent. Possibly Grorek himself was staging this to derail the truce, or Brannock, or Sira. Was still working through it when Rasha appeared beside him. She moved with very little noise for someone her size, and he had stopped being startled by it after the first week. "You are thinking," she said. "Brannock or Sira," he said. "Probably." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Sira has family in Ashfin who owe money to a trade house. I have known this for 2 weeks. I was watching to see who among you already knew it." He turned to look at her. "You already had a suspect." "I had a possibility. I needed to see who was surprised today and who was not." She met his eyes. "You were surprised. Brannock was not." That landed like a stone in cold water. "You think it's Brannock." "I think Sira carried messages she did not fully understand because she needed money and someone offered it to her. And I think she received her instructions from someone in your delegation." She paused. "Someone with connections to the lowland consortiums and reason to want this truce to fail before it is ratified." Wesley thought about Brannock's careful stillness when Grorek threw the parchment. He thought about the 3 weeks of small delays, sessions pushed back, records that needed recopying, an afternoon when the chamber had been briefly unlocked for ventilation while the documents were still inside. "How do we prove it?" "We give them something wrong to pass along," she said. "And then we watch where it lands." He looked at her. In the weak highland sun she was, he thought, a genuinely extraordinary person, not just for her physical presence, though that was considerable, but for the quality of her mind, the particular combination of patience and precision that she brought to every problem. He had met people who were strategically smart. He had not met many who were strategically calm. "When did you start trusting me enough to tell me this?" he asked. She considered the question seriously, which he had come to understand was simply how she operated. She did not dismiss questions as rhetorical. 14 days ago, she said. "You helped repair the smokehouse roof when one of the Gorehorn men hurt his hand. No one asked you. You noticed it needed doing and you did it." He blinked. "That's what decided it. Small things decided by choice tell more than large things decided by circumstance," she said simply. He did not have an answer for that, so he said nothing. She turned to go. And then, very deliberately, she stopped and turned back, and the look she gave him was different from all the preceding looks. It was still direct, still precise, but there was something else in it now, something warmer and more complicated. "I notice things about you, Wesley Hayes," she said. "I have noticed a great many things. You should know that." She left him standing in the yard in the cold highland wind, feeling considerably warmer than the temperature warranted. That night, past the turning hour when the longhouse had gone quiet, he lay awake and let himself think about it properly. The marriage arrangement. What it actually meant beyond the politics. He had agreed to it before he met her, which was either practical or cowardly depending on how you looked at it. He had decided to come to Vorenhall, and to do the thing that needed doing because it served the truce, and the truce served the mountain people, human and orc alike, and he was capable of the commitment required. That was how he had framed it. That was the clean, responsible story he had told himself. It was somewhat harder to maintain that framing now that he knew her. She was not what he had been bracing for. He had braced, without fully admitting it, for duty. For a measured, respectful arrangement with a woman he could honor but not truly know. He had not braced for someone who moved through the world with that particular quality of aliveness, the kind of person who sharpens everything around them simply by being present. He had not expected to find her funny in her dry, minimal way. He had not expected to feel, when she looked at him, that he was being genuinely seen rather than evaluated. He thought about what she had said. "I notice things about you." He had been living alone, emotionally alone, whatever the technical company, for long enough that the idea of being noticed by someone who looked at the world with her precision felt like standing too close to a fire after a long cold, overwhelming and wanted at the same time. He fell asleep thinking about the way her hands had moved when she was guiding Myra through the song. The trap for the spy worked faster than either of them expected. Rasha seeded a false detail through a closed session, a changed provision about patrol territories that would have alarmed the merchant consortium if true, and within 36 hours, Gorehorn arrived with another piece of parchment. This one had the false provision written on it almost verbatim. The confirmation came down like a hammer. It was not Brannock who broke. It was Sira the translator, who had been given the false information privately by Wesley in a brief hallway exchange that Brannock had not been present for. Sira had passed it directly to Gorehorn, which meant the chain ran from Brannock to Sira to the Skullbridge contingent. Gorehorn was not just a disruptive presence. He was actively employed by the consortium as a spoiler. The confrontation happened outdoors in the main yard of the hold in the raw gray morning before the session was due to begin. Rasha emerged from the great hall with 3 Gorehorn warriors at her back and stopped Gorehorn before he reached the entrance. Wesley came from the guest longhouse to find the yard already tense Gorehorn clanspeople lining the edges, the Skullbridge contingent frozen near the gate, Gorehorn's hand moving toward a blade he had not yet drawn. Rasha's voice carried across the yard like a struck bell. She spoke in Orcish first, which Wesley could not fully follow, but the translator, not Sira. She was under house watch, rendered it in real time. She named the false provision. She named the timeline. She said, with a calm that was somehow more impressive than fury would have been, that the truce would continue, that the spoilers had failed, and that anyone who wished to oppose it further was welcome to say so clearly rather than through sabotage and paid intermediaries. Gorehorn did not draw the blade. He held the silence for a long moment, looking at Rasha, and then at Wesley, and then at the arrayed Gorehorn warriors, and he made the calculation that men who want to live usually make in time. He lowered his hand. Wesley, standing in the center of the yard with nothing between him and the situation except his own presence, caught Rasha's eye over Gorehorn's shoulder. She gave him the smallest possible nod. He returned it. The business was finished. Brannock confessed before the afternoon. He had debts and a consortium contact and had convinced himself the truce would fail anyway without his help failing it. The story was depressingly ordinary. The Gorehorn elders accepted his removal from the process. Wesley agreed to serve as both trapper witness and sole human signatory for the remaining sessions, which meant more responsibility than he had originally been offered, and the same amount of coin, which was fine. He had not been doing it for the coin. It was the following evening, after the session had ended and the hold had breathed out collectively with the relief of people who had expected a crisis and watched it dissolve, that he came back to the guest longhouse and found Rasha teaching Myra the Gorehorn battle call. And that is the moment that mattered. That is the moment that, when he looked back later, was the hinge on which everything turned. He had stood in the doorway and seen Rasha crouched beside his not-quite daughter, guiding her hands, teaching her something that belonged to the deepest, oldest tradition of the Gorehorn sept. Battle songs were not casual knowledge. They were clan memory. They were passed down through bloodlines and earned through belonging. You did not teach a human girl a Gorehorn war song without meaning something by it, without claiming her in the quiet Orcish sense as someone worth the gift. Rasha had looked caught, yes. She had not been ready to be seen doing it. It was a private thing, a thing she had done out of genuine feeling rather than policy. And then she had lifted her chin and let the pride come, because she was Rasha Gorehorn and she did not apologize for things she chose. Wesley had said, "Let's hear it then," Myra had sung. She had the timing wrong in the second phrase, and the vowels were somewhere between Orcish and the Highland common, but she sang it with everything she had, her eyes lit, her hands moving in the pattern Rasha had shown her. And at the end of it, Rasha still crouched, still watching. Myra began to clap the count rhythm, slowly, and Myra's eyes went wide with the effort of holding both the melody and the beat. Wesley sat down on the bench near the fire and watched the two of them work at it together. The longhouse was warm. The fjord wind pressed at the walls and could not get in. He sat there for a long time, feeling something he could not immediately name, and slowly he recognized it as the specific, unfamiliar weight of being exactly where he was supposed to be. When Myra finally got the full verse correct, Rasha made a sound low in her chest, a resonant, approving hum that was distinctly Orcish and entirely warm. And Myra threw her arms around Rasha's neck with the total unself-consciousness of a person who has decided love is practical and should be expressed practically. Rasha's arms came up around Myra after the briefest pause, holding her with a careful, fierce tenderness. Wesley's throat did something awkward. He looked at the fire until he had his face under control. Rasha looked at him over Myra's head. The gold of her eyes in the firelight was extraordinary. The expression on her face was the most unguarded he had ever seen it, open in the way people are only when they have forgotten to be careful, when something has gotten past all the armor. She looked at him as though she was surprised by herself. He thought, "I know the feeling." The next morning he found her at the fjord's edge before the hold was fully awake. She was standing on a rock at the water's lip, looking out at the dark fjord and the gray sky above the mountains, and she had not heard him come down the path. He stopped a few feet back and said her name. She turned. She did not look startled, which he suspected was less about hearing him coming and more about Rasha Gorehorn simply not permitting herself to look startled in public. "I have been thinking," she said without preamble. "So have I," he said. She studied him. "The arrangement," she began, "is not just an arrangement," he said. "Not for me. I want to say that clearly so we are not performing something. I came here because it needed doing and I was capable of doing it. But that is not the reason I am still." He stopped himself, picked the word more carefully, "still invested." Not anymore. She was very still. The fjord reflected the sky behind her. What changed? He thought about a lot of things and settled on honesty. "You." The word sat between them in the cold morning air. Rasha looked at him with that absolute gaze, and he had learned enough about her by now to know that the intensity of it was not threat or challenge. It was the way she gave her full attention, the way she made space for something real. "The trapping line," she said eventually. "Your territory on the ridge, you would leave it. It will be there next season, this won't be. You have no family here. The Gorehorn sept are not your people." "Myra is my people," he said. "She has decided you are her people. That is sufficient for me." Something crossed her face, not quite a smile, something deeper than that, something that started in her eyes and moved through her whole expression slowly, like warmth through cold stone. She said, "She sang the second verse nearly correctly this morning before I was awake. She was practicing alone in the dark." He laughed before he could stop it. "That sounds exactly like her." "She is remarkable," Rasha said, and then more quietly, "as are you, Wesley Hayes. In ways I did not anticipate." He crossed the remaining distance between them without deciding to. It simply happened, the way things happen when the body outpaces the cautious mind. He stopped close enough that the warmth of her was perceptible in the morning cold. She was taller than him by several inches, and she did not step back. She looked down at him with those burning amber eyes, and for the first time the composed precision of her expression was entirely absent, replaced by something raw and wanting and real. He reached up and took her hand from where it hung at her side. Her hand was twice the breadth of his, calloused from sparring grips and the particular roughness of the highland wind. He held it carefully. "I noticed something about you," he said, "since we are being exact about it." "When?" she asked. "Day 5, he said. "You were arguing with Elder Var about the Southern Patrol provision, and you were right and he knew it, and you let him come to it himself instead of winning loudly. You gave him the path to agree. I thought that was remarkable." Her hand tightened around his. "Day 14, she said. "The smokehouse roof." "We have established that," he said. "Day 18, she continued as though building a list. "You gave Myra your heavier cloak in the yard and stood in the cold for 2 hours without once looking cold, because you did not want her to feel guilty." She paused. "Day 23. You disagreed with me about the Eastern Patrol boundary in the session, and you were correct, and you stated it so precisely and so without embarrassment that I had to revise the provision." Her fingers had laced through his. "I do not often revise." "I noticed," he said. She leaned down, not hesitantly, not searching for permission, simply because she had made a decision and she was a person who acted on her decisions, and kissed him. Her mouth was warm and tasted faintly of the highland spirit from the previous night's session. He kissed her back, with every honest thing he had been carrying around for 3 weeks. When they separated, the fjord was catching the first light, the water going from black to a deep bruised silver. Rasha was still close, her forehead near his, her breath visible in the cold air. "The arrangement," she said. "Yes," he said. "I want it to be real," she said. "Not a strategy, not a signing document, real." "It already is," he said. He had not known that the Gorehorn sept held a specific custom for this moment, that when a match was made and both parties had chosen, the woman made a claiming mark. He had not known because Brannock, who had arranged the marriage provision, had not known either, or had not thought it worth mentioning. He found out about it from Myra, which was both typical and unfortunate in its timing. Myra found him 3 days later in the guest longhouse cleaning his trapping knives, which he did when he needed to think, and she sat across from him and said with the directness that was her primary characteristic, "Dovrak told me about the claiming mark, the Gorehorn custom. She said Rasha has not done it yet and the clan is waiting." Wesley set down the knife very carefully. "Explain the custom." Myra explained it. The claiming mark was a bite deliberate, specific, placed on the shoulder or collarbone, that Orcish women gave the partners they had chosen in the old tradition. It was not barbaric, it was sacred. It marked a bond as chosen and reciprocal, not assigned. In the Gorehorn sept it carried more weight than any signed agreement. It was permanent, a scar, not a bruise, and it was, among the sept, publicly acknowledged. You could see it, people would look for it. The absence of it would read to the sept as ambivalence. Wesley sat with this for a moment. Then he said, "I assume this requires my agreement." "Obviously," said Myra. "She would not do it without asking." "She is not, she is Rasha." He thought about what it meant, a scar, permanent. A thing the sept would know, a thing that said, chosen and knowing it and glad. "Did she ask you to tell me this?" He said. Myra's expression was carefully neutral in the way it only was when she was trying to be tactful, which was not often. "She told Dovrak, who told me, who is now telling you, so technically no." "She is too proud to ask directly," Wesley said. "She has been asking you for a week," Myra said, "just not with words." He had been aware of this, actually. He had been aware of the slight tension in Rasha over the previous days, the way she held herself when they were close, the particular quality of her restraint, the moments when he caught her watching him with an expression that was equal parts desire and uncertainty. Rasha Gorehorn uncertain was one of the more affecting things he had encountered. It made her, paradoxically, even more magnificent. He found her that evening in the sparring yard after the others had gone in, working through a kata with a practice blade by torchlight. He watched her for a moment from the yard's edge, the fluid, formidable precision of her movement, the way she inhabited her body with such complete ease, and then he called her name. She stopped. She turned. He walked across the yard to her and stopped close, close enough that she had to look slightly down at him, and he said, "I hear the sept is waiting." She was very still. The torchlight moved on her face. "I want you to do it," he said. "I am not saying it because of the truce or the signing document. I am saying it because I have never been certain of anything as quickly or as completely as I am certain of this. Of you, of wanting this to be what it is." Her breath was unsteady. He had never heard her breath unsteady before. "You understand it is permanent," she said. "I am hoping for permanent," he said. She set down the practice blade. She crossed her arms over her chest in the Gorehorn salute, a gesture of honoring, and then she lowered them. Her hands came up to frame his face with a gentleness that he suspected would have startled anyone who only knew her as a war speaker's daughter and a seasoned warrior. She looked at him for a long moment. "You are the most unexpected thing that has happened to me in 31 years, she said. "You are the most extraordinary thing that has happened to me in 34, he said. She kissed him again, deeper this time, with the particular heat of something decided and freely given. And when she drew back, she reached for the lacing at his collar, and he moved to help her with it. And the torches burned down and the fjord wind swept the yard, and neither of them was cold. He carried the mark home the next morning. It was low on his left collarbone, half covered by his shirt collar when fastened, but visible when the collar lay open. The scar was not ugly. It was deliberate, precise, 2 curving points and a sweep between them, the shape of the Gorehorn clan sigil in miniature, rendered in the specific way that meant chosen and bound. It ached the way healed wounds ache, with a warmth that was not unpleasant. He touched it in the morning light and felt something settled and solid in his chest. The opposite of the particular loneliness he had been carrying so long, it had started to feel like a permanent feature of his personality. He had not anticipated that the mark would be seen that morning. He came into the great hall for the signing session, the final formal session, the one that ratified the truce in full, with his collar only half fastened because Myra had knocked on the door and rushed him. Elder Var saw it immediately. The old Orcish elder looked at the collarbone, looked at Wesley's face, looked across the hall at Rasha. His expression was complex, and then it was warm, genuinely warm, the first open warmth Wesley had seen from him, and he made a sound low in his chest that was not unlike the approving hum Rasha had made for Myra's singing. The other Gorehorn clanspeople in the hall looked. They noticed. The word moved through the room in the way news moves through close communities, quickly and with heat. Wesley stood still and let them look, because there was nothing shameful here, nothing to be managed, and because Rasha had taught him by example that the best response to being seen is to let yourself be seen cleanly. Rasha was standing at the far end of the hall. She met his eyes across the room. Her chin was up. She looked in the full firelight of the great hall with her sept around her, and the morning light coming through the high windows, absolutely magnificent. She looked like someone who had claimed what she wanted and was not remotely sorry about it. He thought, "God, she is something." He thought, "She chose me." He thought, "I am the luckiest man on any ridge in any range of mountains in this entire world." The signing session proceeded without incident. All remaining provisions were ratified. The truce held. In the weeks that followed, the hold shifted around him in the subtle way of a place that has accepted something new. He was no longer the human trapper who had come for the negotiations. He was Rasha Gorehorn's chosen, which was a different status entirely, and the sept related to it in the direct, pragmatic way orcs related to most things. If she had chosen him, he was worth knowing. They tested him in small ways, challenging his opinions in the evening sessions at the great hall, asking him about the trapping line, and listening carefully to how he spoke about the territory, watching how he treated the hold's resources and people. He passed, he supposed, or at least he did not fail, because by the 3rd week past the signing, he was being included in conversations that were not about him at all but simply happened to be happening near him. Myra had, by this point, become what could only be described as a mascot of the Gorehorn sparring yard. Dovrak was training her every morning. She was still terrible with a staff, but her terrible had a specific quality of fierce determination that the Gorehorn warriors apparently found winning, because she was rarely without company. Wesley watched this and thought about the peculiar mathematics of belonging, how you arrived in a place with nothing to offer but your honest self, and somehow it became enough. He worked his way into the hold's practical life with the same approach. He helped with the autumn repairs, the kind of structural work he knew from his own buildings on the trapping line. He joined the hunting parties for the highland deer that the hold needed to salt for winter, and he was useful there in the way he was always useful in terrain, quietly, without ceremony, simply by knowing how to read a ridge and a wind and a track. He brought back 2 animals on the second hunt that no one else had spotted, and the hunters came back with him without making too great a thing of it, which was the exactly correct response. Rasha was in all of it and none of it. She was busy with the post-truce business. The practical work of a new agreement requires as much labor as brokering it, because terms on parchment need living arrangements to support them. She was managing communication with the Skullbridge, except now that Gorehorn had been removed, establishing the actual patrol boundaries, working out the trade provisions with the new Ashfin representative who had been sent up to replace Brannock. Wesley saw her every evening and some mornings, and a handful of middle hours when the day allowed it, and each of those times was its own particular thing, distinct from all the others. She came to him one night with her hair loose, something he had not seen before, the black mass of it falling past her shoulders, and simply sat beside him at the fire in the guest longhouse after Myra had gone to the bunk. She did not speak for a long time. He did not need her to. He handed her the cup of spirit he had poured for himself, and she drank half of it and handed it back. "I was not certain," she said eventually, "that this would feel the way it feels." "What were you expecting?" he asked. "Duty," she said. "Respect, possibly. The understanding that it was necessary and that I was capable of it." She looked at the fire. "I had had arrangements before. My first was a warrior's pairing when I was 22. We were well matched in training and in disposition, and we cared for each other properly. It ended when he was killed on the eastern ridge." She paused. "I have not wanted to feel anything particular since then. It seemed impractical." He sat with that. "I understand that," he said. "I was married at 22 as well. She died of fever. I managed everything after that by keeping moving." She looked at him. Myra is Donal's daughter. She came with me because there was no other option, and then she became," he stopped. "She became mine. I don't know exactly when. It was not a decision so much as a recognition." "That is how belonging works," Rasha said. "It does not announce itself." They were silent for a moment. The fire burned. The longhouse walls held the wind out. "You could have chosen a Gorehorn man," he said. "Someone the Sept already knew, someone easier." "Easier?" she repeated, with a tone that made it clear she found the concept unimpressive. "I am 31 years old. I have spent half my life choosing the difficult path because it was right. I did not want easy." She paused, and when she continued her voice was different, quieter, with the specific weight of honesty stripped of all performance. "I wanted someone who would see me. Not the war speaker's daughter, not the Gorehorn blade, not the strategic value of the arrangement. Someone who would look at me directly and see a person." She turned to look at him fully. "You looked at me that way from the first morning. I noticed it before I had permission to want it." He reached across and took her hand again, the way he had at the fjord's edge, because it was the truest physical expression he knew of what he was feeling. "You have always had permission," he said. "You were the only one deciding you didn't." She exhaled slowly. She looked at their joined hands, his, all rough work and sun-dark skin, hers twice as large and the deep green of a mountain forest. She turned his hand over and pressed her mouth to the inside of his wrist, not a kiss exactly, more like a breath with deliberate intent, and he felt it all the way up his arm and into the solid, warm weight in his chest. "Wesley," she said against his wrist, "I am not good at small feelings. I do not feel things in small amounts. What I feel for you." She stopped, and for the first time since he had known her she seemed to be genuinely searching for words. This woman who commanded sessions and troops and arguments with precision, it is not small. Mine isn't either, he said. She looked up. Her eyes in the firelight were molten gold. Good, she said simply. The ceremony was set for the last full moon before the passes closed. The Gorehorn claiming ceremony was not a human wedding. It was older and simpler, and in some ways more absolute. The participants stood before the sept in the great hall with the elder as witness, and they spoke the old words, a pledge of choosing, not possession, a statement of what they were to each other, not what they owed each other, and then the sept acknowledged the bond aloud collectively. There was a feast. There was singing. The claiming mark was publicly seen and recognized. And that was it. The thing was done. Wesley spent the 2 days before the ceremony in a state he could only describe as quietly electrified. He was not anxious, exactly. He was acutely, almost uncomfortably aware of how much the outcome mattered to him, which was not a state he was experienced in. He had spent years in the deliberate emotional discipline of a man alone in wilderness. You do not survive that kind of life if you are in the habit of wanting things too much. He had unlearned wanting, or thought he had. Rasha was teaching him to unlearn the unlearning, which was more disorienting than it had any right to be. Myra helped with his preparations by being aggressively practical about them. She found him a shirt that was appropriate for the ceremony Gorehorn colors, deep green and ash gray, linen over his best leather vest, and told him he needed to stop touching his hair. She had acquired from somewhere in the hold a length of copper-threaded leather that matched Rasha's hair braid, and she tied it around his wrist without asking. "What is that for?" he said. "I asked Dovrak about it," she said. "Gorehorn sept, when they want to honor someone at a ceremony, they wear their clan color close to them. She said it is usually clan family who does it for you. Since I am the closest thing you have to clan," she did not finish the sentence. She tied the leather off with a neat knot and looked at it critically. Wesley looked down at his wrist. He looked at Myra. "You are the closest thing I have to clan," he said. "You have been for a year." I should have said it before. Myra, who was not in the habit of being caught off guard, was caught off guard. Her jaw worked for a moment. Then she said, "Well, good. Now stop touching your hair." He stopped touching his hair. The great hall was full when the evening came. Every member of the Gorehorn sept who was present in the hold had gathered clanspeople of all ages, the smiths and healers and hunters and warriors, the sparring yard regulars who had come to know Wesley over the past weeks, the elder women who had taught Myra nettle weaving, Dovrak with her arms crossed and her expression the closest it ever got to gentle. The hall was lit with torches in the wall sconces and with the great fire in the central pit, and the light was amber and red, and the warmth was the particular suffocating warmth of many bodies and a working fire and a celebration. Rasha stood at the front of the hall when Wesley entered, and he stopped walking for a moment. She had let her hair down again, the black mass of it loose around her shoulders, but she had woven copper wire through the front sections above her temples, and it caught the torchlight like something molten. She was in her leather vest and fitted trousers, but she had put on a green cloak over it, deep forest green, pinned at the shoulder with a cast bronze clasp in the shape of the Gorehorn sigil. She was every inch the war speaker's daughter, commanding and magnificent, and she was looking at him with an expression that he had come to understand was the most undefended version of her face, open and warm and unashamed. He crossed the hall to her, and the sept made way. He could feel them watching, not with judgment, but with interest, with the specific attention of people witnessing something real. He stood before Rasha and she looked down at him, and something in his chest settled into place with the finality of something that has been traveling a long way toward home. Elder Var stood before them. He spoke in Orcish first, the old formal words, and then in the common tongue for the human records. He spoke about choosing, about the meaning of the claiming mark, about what a bond made before the sept signified. He asked them in turn to speak. Rasha spoke first. She spoke in Orcish, and Var translated quietly, but Wesley understood more of it than he let on. He had been listening to the language for weeks, and some things translate across any gap. She said that she had expected to keep her heart contained and had found it would not stay. She said that she had chosen in full knowledge and full freedom. She said that what she was making was not a treaty but a home, and that she intended it to last. Wesley spoke in the common tongue slowly, with the care of someone who knows that what he says will be remembered and wants it to be true. He said that he had arrived in this hold as a stranger and had been met with honesty, and that honesty had made it possible to see clearly. He said that Rasha Gorehorn was the most remarkable person he had encountered in a life spent in remarkable country, and that being chosen by her was a thing he had not earned and did not intend to waste. He said that the sept had given him, without obligation, the experience of belonging somewhere and to someone, and that it was the best thing that had happened to him. He said, "I choose you, freely, fully, and with everything I have." Rasha's expression in the torchlight was undone in the best possible way. Her composure was still there, but it was thin and bright over something enormous and warm. Her amber eyes were brilliant. She said in the common tongue for him rather than for the hall, "And I choose you. I have been choosing you for weeks. I want you to know I would choose you again." Elder Var spoke the acknowledgement words. The sept responded collectively, a deep, resonant sound that filled the hall and moved through the floor and into the feet, and it was, Wesley understood, the most wholehearted sound he had ever heard. Rasha cupped his face in her hands and kissed him in front of her entire sept, and the hall erupted. Myra, somewhere near the back, made a sound that was probably cheering. Wesley was too occupied to be certain. The feast was everything a Gorehorn celebration was supposed to be. The food was extraordinary: whole roasted mountain boar, braised root vegetables with smoked bone marrow, flatbreads with rendered fat and salt, the highland spirit in quantities that suggested the brewmaster had been preparing for weeks. The singing started before the plates were cleared, the Gorehorn sept moving through songs that Wesley only half understood but felt completely. The rhythms were in the bones of the music, the joy in the upper voices, the weight of clan memory in the low harmonies. Myra sang the first verse of the battle call with the group when it came around, her timing nearly perfect now, her vowels still uncertain but her heart fully present. The Gorehorn warriors around her noticed and included her more fully on the next verse, which caused her to miss the timing from sheer delight at being included. Rasha watched this from beside Wesley, their shoulders touching, her hand warm in his, and the expression on her face was the expression he had first seen the night he caught her teaching Myra in the guest longhouse, that specific, unguarded warmth, the look of someone who has let down the last piece of armor and found to their own surprise that the air is fine. "You started this," he said quietly, "just for her. The song. All of it," he said, teaching her the song. That was the moment I understood what kind of person you were. Not the negotiations, not the trap for the spy, the song in the longhouse when you thought I wasn't watching." She was quiet for a moment. "It seemed important," she said, "that she knows something real about the Gorehorn, not the lowland stories, the actual tradition, the actual meaning." She paused. "She reminded me of someone fearless. I find that difficult to resist." "Myra has that effect," he said. "So do you," Rasha said. He looked at her. She looked back, and there was heat in it and certainty and a depth that he thought he would spend a long time learning, and was looking forward to every moment of it. "I am not fearless," he said. "No," she agreed. "You are better than fearless. You are afraid and you do the thing anyway. That is the harder version." He thought about that. He thought about the morning at the fjord's edge, about crossing the remaining distance, about saying the words that mattered. He thought about all the years of keeping moving and the peculiar grace of finally, decisively, stopping. "I had good motivation," he said. She leaned down and pressed her mouth to his temple, a gentle, deliberate gesture, the kind that means more than a kiss precisely because it is not a kiss. It is a choosing to be close. He felt the warmth of it travel through him the way warmth travels through cold stone, slow and thorough and permanent. "Stay," she said. "Not for the truce, not for the signing. Stay." Yes, he said. He had not needed to think about it. He had already been staying in every sense that mattered for weeks. The passes began to close with the first serious snow 10 days later, and Wesley sent his trapping lines north in the care of a fellow trapper he trusted, along with a letter that detailed the changed arrangements and was probably the strangest letter the mountain postal runners had ever carried. He kept his best knives and his knowledge of the ridge and his capacity to be useful in territory, and he put the rest into the life at Vorenhall. Myra was insufferably pleased about all of it. She developed an unsettling friendship with Dovrak, the two of them conducting a long-running philosophical argument about the comparative merits of staff versus blade that apparently required hours of daily practice to support. She was becoming, Wesley thought, genuinely competent in a way that was both gratifying and slightly alarming. She was also learning Orcish at a rate that embarrassed him, given that he was the adult. He worked on it. He and Rasha spent evenings in which she would speak to him in Orcish about something ordinary, the hunt that morning, the specific problem with the Eastern Patrol boundary, what the elder had said about the coming winter's severity, and he would respond in halting, improving Orcish, and she would correct him without condescension in a way that made the correction feel like a gift rather than a verdict. His pronunciation was still difficult. Some of the sounds were ones his throat had not been built for. Rasha told him, with the specific warmth that was becoming his favorite thing about her, that his pronunciation of the word for mountain sounded like the word for embarrassed bear, and he had laughed until the longhouse rang with it. The hold settled into the rhythm of deep winter. Snow came in earnest, piling against the sod walls and turning the fjord's edge to ice. The Gorehorn sept drew together in the way communities in hard climates draw together, more meals in common, more evenings in the Great Hall, more of the collective warmth that is the actual survival mechanism of highland living. Wesley was part of it. He was not a visitor anymore. He was not a human guest or a political arrangement or an outsider who had been permitted entry. He was there, present in the way that only time and shared work create. He went out on the winter hunts with the Gorehorn trackers. He brought his knowledge of the northern ridge terrain to their knowledge of the southern face, and together they tracked the winter elk through snowfields that would have been impassable alone. He came back one afternoon with a great rack of antlers and 3 elk behind the hunting party and the tracking leader, a gruff, one-eyebrowed orc named Borak, who had regarded Wesley with comprehensive suspicion since the first we clapped him on the shoulder so hard he nearly went face first into the snow. Rasha heard about it from 6 different people before he even got back to the hold. She was waiting in the yard when the hunting party came through the gate, and she looked at him coming through the snow with the evening light behind him, and she had that expression again, the involuntary one, the one that had nothing to do with strategy. "Borak likes you," she said. "Borak hit me hard enough to give me a headache," he said. "That is how Borak shows affection," she said. "You should see what he does to people he loves." He grinned. She grinned back, a proper, complete grin, tusks and all, the kind she gave rarely, and that turned him upside down every time. She took the elk's lead rope from him, and together they walked the animal to the hold's storehouse, their shoulders touching in the cold, and the snow came down around them in the specific, beautiful silence of highland winter, and it was one of the best moments of his life. He told her so later. By the fire in the longhouse they now shared, he had moved from the guest longhouse 3 weeks after the ceremony without fuss, because it was simply where he belonged. She was sitting with her back against the stone bench, her hair loose, her long legs extended toward the fire, and he was leaning against her side in the comfortable way of people who have stopped negotiating space between them. "I have been counting them," he said. "The best moments. There are more of them in the last 3 months than in the previous 10 years. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I have been doing the same. I have not done that before. Counting, wanting to," she said. "I did not before this want to hold on to moments. I let them go because holding felt like a risk I did not need to take." She looked at the fire. Now I want to keep all of them." He turned his head and looked up at her, at the fire-lit planes of her face, at the copper wire threaded through the sections of her hair, at the line of her jaw and the set of her shoulders, and the specific way she existed in the world present and direct, and more alive than anyone he had known. He thought about what it was to be wanted by this person. He thought about what it was to be seen, genuinely and completely, by someone who looked at everything with such precision. He said, "Then keep them." "I intend to keep making them." She looked down at him. Her hand came up and moved through his hair with a gentleness that was, by now, expected and still extraordinary. "You are the best decision I have made," she said. He settled more firmly against her side. "The feeling is mutual," he said. "The feeling is, in fact, very mutual." The fire burned. The wind worked at the walls and could not get in. Outside, the hold was alive with voices, and the smell of wood smoke and the sound of Myra somewhere in the hall running through the second verse of a Gorehorn battle call, with the kind of commitment that told him she was about to get it perfectly right. The fjord was frozen beyond the walls. The mountains were white and still and enormous. The passes were closed and would stay closed until the spring thaw. He was Wesley Hayes, a 34-year-old mountain trapper who had come to a highland clan hold to witness a treaty, and had found himself caught, willingly and completely, in the choosing of a woman who could have chosen anything and had chosen him. He was not alone. He had not been alone since the morning at the fjord's edge, when he crossed the remaining distance and found out what it felt like to have someone meet him there. It felt like this. The day before the Deep Winter Festival, the Gorehorn Sept celebration of the solstice, a night of fires and songs and the collective marking of another year survived, Wesley and Rasha walked the fjord's edge together at midday. The ice was thick enough to walk on at the shore, blue-white and precise in the way of highland ice. The sky was cloudless, the mountains sharp against it, the air so cold it had a taste. Rasha was talking about the spring arrangements, the first post-truce trading season, the patrol rotations, the meeting that would need to happen at the border hold in the valley before the snowmelt. She talked about it the way she talked about everything, with clarity and specificity and the underlying warmth of someone who genuinely cared about what she was doing. He listened and contributed and watched the way the cold light moved on her face and thought, "Here, this is the rest of my life. Right here." She caught him looking. She always caught him looking. "You are not listening," she said. "I am listening," he said. "You said the Eastern Patrol needs 3 rotations instead of 2 and Barak should lead the first one because he knows the ridge best." She blinked. "You were listening." "I was also looking," he said. "I am capable of both." She shook her head, but she was smiling that real, complete smile. "What were you thinking about?" "The rest of my life," he said simply. She stopped walking. He stopped with her. They were standing on the ice-edged shore with the whole fjord spread before them and the mountains beyond it and the sky above it all, enormous and blue and indifferent in the way that wilderness is always indifferent, which is also the way it is always beautiful. She said, "Tell me." He said, "I was thinking that I did not know a person could feel this at home, somewhere they had never been before. I was thinking that every morning I wake up and I know where I am, and I know who is beside me, and it is the first time in years that either of those things has been true. I was thinking," he stopped, and started again with the care of something important, "that you ended a very long loneliness I had not fully admitted to myself, and I am not certain I have thanked you for that." She looked at him for a long moment. The fjord wind moved between them and around them, and they stood in it together without moving. "You did not need to thank me," she said. "You ended the same thing for me." He reached out and took her hand. She took his. They stood on the frozen shore in the brilliant cold, 2 people who had arrived at each other from opposite directions and found, improbably and completely, that the distance was closed. "Come on," she said eventually, quietly. "There is a festival tomorrow and Myra is going to sing the battle call for the entire sept, and she will never forgive us if we are not there to hear it." He laughed. He held her hand. They walked back up the fjord path toward the hold with the smoke rising from the longhouse chimneys above them, and the sound of the hold's life drifting down voices, and the ring of the smith's hammer, and somewhere, inexhaustible and entirely herself, Myra running through a verse one more time until it was right. The solstice festival filled the great hall to its edges and spilled out into the yard, where the clanspeople had built a bonfire of winter oak that sent sparks upward into the black solstice sky. Every torch in the hold was lit. The elder women had hung copper discs from the longhouse gables, and they turned in the wind and caught the firelight and scattered it in spinning patterns across the snow. The smell was pine smoke and roasted meat, and the highland spirit being passed in communal cups. The singing was everything. The Gorehorn Sept put everything they were into song. The low, harmonic tradition of the battle calls. The lighter, faster summer remembrance songs sung even in winter for the contrast. The old laments in the Orcish tongue that went back further than any person in the room, that came from a time before the wars with the lowlanders, before the treaties and the raiding and the long hard history, back to the clean beginning of a people in their mountains. Wesley sat with Rasha's arm around him and listened and felt the music in the walls and the floor and in his own chest, which had a permanent resident, now a specific warmth that had moved in some weeks ago and showed no signs of leaving. He thought it was probably named Rasha. He thought it might also be named Myra and Vorenhall, and Boric, who expressed affection through physical violence, and Elder Var, who had warmed in stages to something like partiality, and Dovrak, who was turning his not-quite-daughter into a warrior whether anyone asked her to or not. He thought, this is what it means to belong somewhere, not the absence of strangeness. The presence of people who have decided you are theirs. Myra stood up at the fire to sing. She stood the way she did everything, with her chin up and her eyes bright, and a total absence of self-consciousness that was either very brave or entirely genuine, which Wesley suspected were the same thing. She stood up in front of the entire Gorehorn Sept, a 16-year-old human girl with a gap-toothed smile and copper-threaded leather at her wrist that matched his own, and she sang the Gorehorn battle call from the first verse to the third, her timing clean, her vowels improved to the point of being recognizable, her heart completely and entirely in it. The hall went quiet to listen. That was its own kind of acknowledgement. When she finished, Rasha made the approving hum, and then the rest of the Sept did it too, that resonant, collective sound, and Myra's face in the firelight was incandescent. She sat back down between Dovrak and one of the younger Gorehorn hunters, and was immediately included in an argument about something technical that Wesley did not catch. He looked up at Rasha. She was looking at Myra with that particular warmth that had become her Myra expression, the involuntary, specific tenderness of someone who has attached against their initial intentions. He reached up and touched her jaw just briefly to turn her attention to him. She looked down. He said, "Thank you for the song." She understood exactly what he meant. "She earned it," she said, then more quietly, "as did you." He kissed her there in the middle of the hall with the entire Sept around them and the bonfire crackling outside and the copper discs spinning in the winter dark, and it was exactly the right thing to do. Someone in the hall made an approving sound. Someone else said something in Orcish that he did not catch but which produced laughter. Rasha kissed him back with the particular warmth and precision of everything she was, and when they separated she was smiling against his mouth. He held on. She let him. This was the thing, Wesley Hayes thought, that no one had thought to warn him about, that the end of loneliness was not a quiet thing. It was not a soft resolution that settled over you gradually and you looked up one day and thought, "Oh, I suppose I am less alone now." It was a bonfire. It was a great hall full of voices. It was a woman who could have chosen anyone choosing him, again and again, in every small deliberate act, in every held gaze and warm word and midnight conversation by the fire, choosing him as though he was the obvious and only choice, the one she had been moving toward without knowing it, the one who, when she found him, made the rest of the world go quiet. It was Rasha Gorehorn with her arm around him and her sept around them both, and his daughter. No qualification needed, no hesitation, singing his life into this place until it belonged. Outside, the solstice fire burned. The passes were closed. The mountains were holding. The fjord was ice and silver under a sky full of cold stars, and up on the stone shelf above it, in the long crescent of longhouses with their copper-disc gables catching the light and throwing it wide, the Gorehorn sept was celebrating the turn of the year with everything they had. Wesley Hayes was home. And in the morning and all the mornings after, Rasha Gorehorn would wake beside him, and he would know exactly where he was. The ceremony had been real. The choosing had been real. The mark on his collarbone was warm in the firelight, permanent and chosen and clean, and the woman who had put it there was looking at him right now as though he was the most worthwhile thing in her considerable range of view. "Stay," she said, very quietly, just for him. He had already said yes. He said it again. Yes.